Today I want to address a question I got by email a little while ago, and this addresses the existence of production partners on Etsy. I'll anonymize all the information in the email, but here's the gist of it. Hey Jess, not sure if you've covered the topic of Etsy sellers buying mass-produced stuff from AliExpress and reselling on Etsy, saying they're handmade when they're not, and taking new photographs to make it look like they made them. They state their production partner is China on Etsy, but their description is so misleading with none of that info. I saw a local seller was one of them who I'd met previously. I messaged them and called them out, but they sincerely believed they weren't misleading anyone. As a person who makes everything myself, I felt their description was very misleading, stating what we say due to the handmade process, etc. I thought it might be a good topic to cover or educate people not to do it. I did report the items and shops to Etsy, so we'll see what happens. But it seems there are so many doing it, especially undercutting real makers. Okay, so there were really two issues here that were brought up in this email. The idea of resellers, which is what I call and what I'm familiar with calling people who sell on Etsy who just are like a mass-produced factory somewhere. You know, there's no one person who is the designer. It's just a big conglomerate that just put their stuff up on Etsy and pretend like it's handmade or designer. And that's the reseller issue. The second issue is what sounds like it's happening here potentially, which is the use of production partners on Etsy. So let's tease apart the differences between these things, what's allowed and what's not allowed on the platform. So let's start by just addressing the whole reseller issue. Now, what that really means is that somebody is buying items in bulk from somewhere else and then reselling them on the platform. So they have no say or input into the design process. They're just like getting on AliExpress or something like that, buying a whole ton of stuff and then selling it on Etsy and passing it off as if it's their own design. Now, it gets a bit confusing because this is sort of allowed in certain categories. So you can sell handmade, and this is not allowed in the handmade category. But if you sell craft supplies or you sell vintage items, then obviously you are probably reselling those items. I mean, some people will make their own craft supplies, but a lot of people will be, sourcing craft supplies and then selling them on Etsy. And that's not technically reselling because, it is, but it's allowed on the platform under the mantle of selling craft supplies. And also obviously vintage because you're buying an old product and reselling that on the platform. However, when it comes to handmade, that is not a practice that is allowed. So let me just read Etsy's definition of handmade items for you. So handmade items are items that are made and or designed by you, the seller. If you sell handmade items, you must physically make or create the original design for your items. Let me just repeat that. Physically make or create the original design for your items. Include each person involved in making your items or running your business in the About section of your shop. If you work with a production partner, you must disclose that production partner in your relevant listings. Use your own photographs in your listings. There is more, but there's a whole policy on that, and I will link to that below if you're interested in checking that out. Okay, so there are obviously a couple of things here that were touched on in that email where she talked about, especially this bit here, saying their production partner is China on Etsy. Now, in the rules about this, where Etsy asks you to add a production partner to your shop, you have to fill out a form telling Etsy and the community about your partnership. Now, you have to enter your business partner's name. Etsy requires you disclose the business name, but you can choose to keep this private in your shop. Okay? In that case, you will enter a public title, such as apparel printer, that describes what kind of business they are. All right, so here we come up against an issue where, from an outside perspective looking in, it might say production partner like Chinese factory or something like that, but Etsy knows the exact company that you are working with because you have to disclose that to them so that they have that information. So even though from the outside you might not see the exact name of the production partner, you know that Etsy has been informed about that, and that the maker or the designer is just keeping that information to themselves, I guess for competitive, reasons. So it sounds to me what has happened in this situation is that a designer has designed pieces and then outsourced them to a production partner. That production partner has then made those items, sent them back to the designer. The designer has photographed them and uploaded them to their Etsy shop. That is all completely legal according to the rules of production partnerships on Etsy. Now, if they were just buying a whole bunch of stuff off AliExpress and reselling it, and they had no input into the design process, that would not be allowed on Etsy. You could report them and their shop would get removed in that case. So let me just again touch on what a production partner is. They're a company or individual who's not part of your Etsy shop that helps physically produce items based on your own original designs. Etsy then goes on to say, examples of production services include, but are not limited to, fine art and apparel printing, 3D printing, cutting, sewing, casting, plating, and engraving. Production partners do not include your own shop members or suppliers from whom you source ready-made products to resell. Okay, so if you have somebody working for you and you've listed them in the about section of your shop, and they like me and Nick. So if you're not familiar, my business is Ethereal, my jewelry business. I'll put a link to it below. My husband, Nick, works with me in the business and he makes a lot of the jewelry. He does the shipping. So he's actually listed in our Etsy shop as one of the members of the shop because he is an employee and he makes stuff and works for me. So he's not a production partner. He's just part of the business, right? A production partner is a separate company or individual somewhere else who produces your designs for you. Again, I will put the link to the information about production partners and the rules on that in the description below this video, so you can go and have a look for yourself as to exactly what is okay and what isn't okay according to Etsy. Okay, now we've clarified the rules. Let's just take a few minutes to just talk about this issue of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So back in the day, to sell in the handmade category on Etsy, you had to make it yourself. You had to design it, you had to make it and produce it yourself. That changed when they brought in this policy about working with production partners, which I can't remember exactly when that was. It was many years ago now though. So this has been a policy that's been in place for a long time. No longer do you have to hand make everything yourself. You can simply design a product and then outsource it to a factory somewhere, a company somewhere to produce your designs for you. But then you have to, make sure you have all your stuff photographed. And obviously, it has to be your design that you are selling. You can't be reselling other people's designs. And that's where that line gets fuzzy for some people, where they're not sure about this rule. I'm not just buying something from somewhere else and reselling it. I'm designing it. I'm outsourcing the production, and then I'm selling the items. And in a lot of cases now, you don't even have to touch or see the items because Etsy allows integration with a number of print-on-demand services that basically mean that you create a design, a piece of artwork, graphic design, you upload it to these print-on-demand companies and sell it via Etsy, and then they make and fulfill the order. So they make it and ship it directly to the customer. And if you are doing that, you get a cut of the profit when you do that. I think this is why it's so important to be really clear on your Etsy shop about how much of this process you are involved in, because a lot of shops on Etsy now are not strictly handmade anymore. Or honestly, you could argue that they're not handmade at all because a lot of these items are mass-produced items. However, the artist or designer is putting their artwork on it and then somebody else is making the product for them. So there is a tension here between the idea of truly handmade and just designed by you. But those things are all well within the rules of the Etsy platform. So if you're selling on Etsy, you simply have to accept that that is the rule and that is what other people are allowed to do on the platform. If you are a traditional maker, like I am, I create my designs, I design them, I make them, well, me and Nick make them, and then we ship them out. I try to make that really clear in all of our marketing, in all of our language, and I really try to push that whole aspect of the fact that yes, we really do design and make all of these products ourselves from our home studio, and that is why they cost what they do, because that's another issue here, is that when you are working with a production partner, it may be that you can afford to charge less for your items because you are getting them made in bulk, and you can therefore pay, lower prices, and you're not spending your time making the products. So I guess long story short, I would say if you want to sell on Etsy, don't get mad about this, get creative about it, and really draw upon, with your branding and everything you do with your shop, draw upon the fact that you are a traditional maker and that you do make the stuff yourself by hand. And like I said, I have this information in my about section. I talk about it in our announcement. I have it in all of our, external marketing on our website, which is separate to Etsy. And, we talk about that there. And also in my thank you message. So I send a direct thank you message to every single person who buys from me. Yes, they get that automated email from Etsy, but who opens those? Nobody reads those. So I send them a separate message every single time. I've done a video about that. If you want to check it out, I'll put a link to that up here about why and how important this is to my business, especially to having a great relationship with my customer and getting amazing reviews from my customers as well. So that is the way that I communicate to my customers how we are a genuine handmade in-house company. So to my email correspondent, from what you said, it sounds like the person who you spoke to is abiding by the rules, and there's nothing, I'm afraid, that you can do about it. However, if you or anyone else watching this video, the general if one does come across reseller shops on Etsy, you can look at the production partner information. If there's no production partner information, or if it's really obvious that they have bought stuff you've seen somewhere else, that's obviously not designed by them or made by them, don't hesitate to, report them, because unless you do, Etsy might not know about them. And finally, this is not a new problem. I talk about this every time I mention this issue. People are like, oh, resellers are getting so bad on Etsy, blah, blah, blah. They have always been there, and they have always been a problem from right at the beginning. This is not a new issue. This is not something that has just popped up in the last few years. I've been selling on Etsy since 2008. There were resellers then. There will always be resellers. The only thing we can do is report them when we see them, and not confuse a reseller with somebody who is using a production partner, because again, that is allowed on the platform. So do report them, but don't let it get you down that these things exist. Remember, if you aren't selling on Etsy, you're selling somewhere else. You're selling on your own website, on another venue site, in shops, at markets. Guess what? You're competing with resellers in all of those places. In all of those places, you have to compete with factory-made items. There is no getting around that. The only thing you can do is stand out on your merits. You can't compete on price with those items that are made in bulk in factories that you will find in all of these other places. And frankly, even if you are selling on Etsy, you're still competing with the rest of the things that are available in the rest of the world, right? People can easily hop over to a search engine and look for what they're looking for rather than just looking on Etsy. And if all they're interested in is getting the thing as cheap as possible, then you're not going to be the person they buy from, because you're not going to be selling it as cheap as possible, because you can't make a living doing that. So stand out on your merits. Think about your branding, think about your brand positioning, think about how you can make your business obviously handmade and how you can make it valuable to people. What is the value in what you make? What makes it special to them? You know what makes it special to you, but you need to communicate to your customers and your potential customers what makes your stuff special and valuable and what makes it stand out. And the people who care about those sorts of things will be your customers. Thank you so much for watching this one. Again, remember I put those links below if you want to check them out and read the Etsy rules for yourself, which I always recommend you do. If you enjoyed this one, give me a thumbs up and let me know any thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos. Finally, here is that video I mentioned earlier about how I use my special message to my customers after they've purchased to say thank you, and how that's had a big impact on the positive reviews that I get and just the great relationship I have with most of my customers. So have a watch of that one next. Thank you so much for watching this one. I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye for now.